These great cypress trees began growing before Columbus discovered America. They grow only a half an inch every 30 years. The big cypress swamp in central Florida currently holds the key to the salvation of the Everglades to the south. Here you can find the alligator, a creature that used to walk with dinosaurs 100 million years ago. It is the home of rare birds, like this limpkin, the snail-eating crying crane of the Florida wilderness. It's also the scene of an unresolved struggle between the needs of man and the needs of nature. Development is pushing towards this last remaining wild place. From Lake Okeechobee and the great cypress swamp, a vast, slow-moving southward flow of water occurs. A river less than a foot deep and at times over 50 miles wide wends its way through the flat sawgrass country, which is the heart of the Everglades. Where the ground is only a few inches higher and therefore above water, small groups of trees form hummocks, tiny islands amongst the sawgrass. The Everglades is a unique living system, totally dependent on water, the right quality of water and the right quantities of water at the right season. For several thousand years, nature has been developing this huge, wet prairie. Finally, at the southern tip of the Florida Peninsula, this great volume of fresh water begins to mix with the salt water of the Gulf of Mexico, producing brackish mangrove swamplands. The mangrove begins growth as a tiny shrub on stilt-like taproots, and later forms a wide belt of sprawling mangrove trees. The well-being and vitality of the park are critically dependent on the successful continuance of the natural cycle of flooding and drying out. The dry season quickens the pace of life in the Everglades. The pools and sloughs now abound with fish concentrated by the lowering of the water level. These pools become so thick with fish, they literally explode with life. Fish form part of the food source for the alligator, but as he feeds, he assures their very survival, because it was the alligator who dug out the deep holes where the remaining fish will live, and thus survive the dry season. Alligators average in size between 6 and 12 feet. They have good eyesight and hearing, and when swimming underwater, their eyes and nostrils are protected by flaps of skin which close until they surface. A large bull alligator might reach a length of 18 feet. These creatures literally eat any other creature they can catch, sometimes even the young of their own kind. His ties with life are dependent on the tiniest creatures, as are all creatures of the perfectly balanced ecosystem of the Everglades. Without the mosquito, there would be no mosquito fish. Then the bass and gar would disappear, and almost certainly the alligator too. The luxuriant growth of strange, unfamiliar trees, air plants, and tree-climbing orchids, as well as one of the last remaining stands of mature cypress, is here in the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary of the National Audubon Society. It is also a nesting area of the wood stork. The wood stork is a bird whose feeding habits require large concentrations of fish. If the fish are scattered, his feeding is disrupted, and the birds will not nest. A colony of wood storks can consume about 2 million pounds of minnows during the nesting season. Hurricanes, floods, partial drought, fires are all part of the seasonal regime of the Everglades. Nature is remarkably resilient, and left to its own devices, recovery is usually quite quick. The red cardinal can find shelter in the vegetation against the storm. Purple gallinule can walk across the reeds lily pads with his long toes. This is one of his adaptations for survival. The coot shares with the gallinule an appetite for aquatic